Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Schmuckler. I'm the host of this podcast, which is it's got a variety of names because I can't make up my mind. But it could be called A Better Human Story. It could be called The Importance of Seeing, or just Seeing Things Whole. It could be A Man on a Mission, and it could be Let's Be the Heroes That We Need. All of those pertain. We're trying to understand the dynamics of what's going on in the human world, and how do we make things right and let them fall apart in destructive ways. And soon we'll be talking about one of the battlefields of this moment, Biden versus Trump, a fork in the road for America. And with me to discuss that topic is my friend, very much appreciate his being here, Bishop Dansby, who is a resident of the congressional district in which I ran for Congress 12 years ago. And we met then and have had a lot of thoughtful exchanges ever since. So I think that he and I will be able to talk in some meaningful way about what this fork in the road is about. But first, I'm going to read a piece that is going to be in the newspapers in this very red congressional district, meaning it's 2-1 Republican. Donald Trump in this region will get 70% of the vote. Every week I get some word out to these folks. And often I publish the same thing on daily costs, and that will be the case with this piece here. But it has a different ring to it when you think I'm putting this in front of on the breakfast table of Trumpian, a traditional red Trumpian district in rural Virginia. Previously, meaning in a previous op-ed, I made a prediction about the upcoming election. I've become less confident about what I foresaw. Some things I still know with certainty, but a swarm of uncertainties have shaken my confidence. My most important certainty concerns what the Republican Party has become. And here, if you picture this as a message to the conservatives, you can see how challenging I'm willing to be to the good people of this district that I got to know when I did talk radio here, and kind of fell in love with a lot of these people who, over the past generation, have moved in the direction that's directly opposite what I appreciated about them before. And that judgment, my judgment about what the Republican Party has become, is of a kind which, after studying such forces for 60 years, with the last 20 focused on the particulars of what's been happening in conservative America, I consider myself an expert. As a doctor might feel evaluating a patient's malady. So I'm challenging to them, and I've got chutzpah. I'm saying, in the context of this piece being about the things that I don't know and the surprises and stuff like that, I'm saying this I do know. So I'm taking advantage of all that I admit that I don't know to say, I have no doubt that this Republican Party deals consistently in falsehoods, advances the very opposite of values that conservatives traditionally held sacred, is assaulting the American constitutional order, is the most fascistic major party in the nation's history. And I really do know all that. I've been studying this stuff closely enough. I got no doubt. This is something that's very dark. and has not been seen before in such a pure form in the history of our country. My earlier prediction that Trump was lose was based on a belief that the great majority of Americans, if they understood well the nature of their upcoming choice, would reject Trump and the Trump party. I still believe that. But that if they understood well, is a big one. Even if it's true that, as I said in my previous piece, no more than 1/3 of Americans want the fascistic future Trump and the Trump party are driving us toward, it's also true that roughly half of Americans are telling pollsters they're inclined to vote for Trump. Together, those would mean that roughly 1/6 of the electorate does not understand what's at stake in the Trump-Biden choice. And here we have that fork of the road that Bishop and I will be discussing shortly. And if they don't understand that by now, why would they by election day? Well, maybe because, as studies show, a great many Americans know almost nothing about public affairs until shortly before the election. I've seen some data about this, and it's kind of mind-blowing, some of the evidence, that the things you would imagine that if you're conscious and not in a coma in America, you couldn't help but know X, Y, and Z, but a lot of people don't. And these studies also suggest, though, that when they finally pay attention, which some say is like Labor Day or the national conventions or something like that, they understand a lot more and vote accordingly. But I don't feel at all certain how much one can bank on that this time. And the reason I'm not sure is because I still don't understand fully how many people can be so clueless about so many things. The thing that just jumped into my mind is, the huge percentage of people who think we're in a recession when we've got really great macroeconomic numbers, the best in the developed world. I mean, how do you do that? And think that the crime rate is soaring when it's been plunging at the fastest rate. Anyway, it's just a bunch of stuff. Some surprises also cloud my prediction. I never imagined that a corruptly partisan Supreme Court would absolutely indefensibly help Trump delay the trial for his most serious crimes for so long that the American people will be deprived of the picture a trial would have shown of Trump's attempt to overthrow the Constitution. How many voters would have been moved by that grotesque picture of Trump's lawlessness? Who knows? But now the only trial that will display Trump's criminality to the American electorate will be the one in Manhattan, where Trump was convicted for illegally cheating to win the presidency in 2016. What I'm saying there isn't quite explicit, but what I'm saying is that I was counting on a bunch of trials taking place that were going to expose to the American people even more vividly and in greater detail, irresistibly, than the January 6th committee in the House that did move public opinion. I was counting on that because I couldn't have imagined that the Supreme Court would do what they do. And if you want to see a bunch about the Supreme Court, you go on my YouTube file. I mean, this Supreme Court have sided with the criminal over the rule of law. That is huge. Trials aside, there's the question of how powerful will be the messaging from those Democrats and Republicans who champion the survival of American democracy. It remains to be seen if the Democrats, with whom messaging has been a weakness for decades, will rise to this occasion. I don't elaborate here about the problem with the Democrats, the messaging being a sign of deeper problems, actually. But anyway, and on the Republican side, it has been disappointing how rare have been Republicans with the integrity to put the nation ahead of their self-interest. I'd not imagined that so many Republican leaders, whose past statements show they understand how unfit Donald Trump is to be president, like you've probably heard the quotations from Mitch McConnell, William Barr, and most recently, Nikki Haley, would betray the nation by announcing support for Trump rather than using their voices to warn Republican voters against him. I must say, though, it's kind of nice that this week Adam Kinzinger has put out a video, very, very well done video, in which he, a devout conservative who never believed he would ever vote for a Democrat for president, is announcing his support for Joe Biden because of the threat that Donald Trump represents. Uncertain whether Republican voices will be loud enough to get the message across to those Republican voters who revere our constitutional order, and how well the Republican leaders will lead them to reject the dangerous candidate who threatens to destroy the order they revere. I'm uncertain, too, about how many Americans appreciate all the blessings that generations of Americans have enjoyed, how many of them that we owe to that order, to things like the rule of law that today's Republican Party is assaulting. I just don't know how many Americans understand that a lot of the good things about our society wouldn't be there but for the imperfect but really important and good order that we were bequeathed by our founders. And that's the fork in the road, is do we keep that order? It seems that more people readily grasp the human level rather than perceiving the larger level of democracy versus fascism, at which a destructive force has been seeping into the American power system. But here's the important thing to know. Everything about Biden is irrelevant. How much you like him, how much you don't like him, how much you recognize he's actually achieved a fair amount, how much. It's all irrelevant, except that the preservation of our heritage as Americans depends on Biden. It depends on Biden, not Trump, winning the election. Whatever one's opinions of Biden's performance, because of the profound threat that the only alternative presidential victor represents, all anyone needs to know about Biden is that he's the champion of the system our founders gave us. That may be the biggest truth, but it's unclear how well that essential understanding can be transmitted to the American electorate. Given the choice, even Biden's age, a genuine concern, cannot decide. Concern, but no, there is no alternative to Biden. Yet, even that issue of age and fitness may play out to weigh in Biden's favor. I bet that if Biden and Trump both went to some prestigious medical facility, Mayo or the Cleveland Clinic or Johns Hopkins, with the agreement that both would undergo a complete physical and mental exam with all the results automatically made public, I bet that Biden would be judged in better shape to serve as president for the next 4 years. And lately, there's increasing talk, some from neurologists, about non-trivial signs of dementia that Trump is displaying and perhaps accelerating into. Anybody seeking to predict will wonder how good of a picture will voters get of the true fitness of these two old men. I know with certainty, what choice our founders would cry out for to make. But with so many uncertainties, I hesitate to predict what Americans will choose. So here we come back, and there is Bishop Dansby, who is going to be in charge of directing our conversation. How readily this sheep will be herded by that fine Australian sheepdog remains to be seen. But let's go wherever you want to go, Bishop.
Well, thank you, Andy, for having me. I think that we might be being distracted from some age-old tendencies of the American voting population. I tend to agree with almost everything that my friend Andy Schmoker says. Quite frankly, we agree on a lot of issues. But if you look at the average voter, you know, there's still a strong American exceptionalism, a strong America first tendency in this country. And those issues tend to be represented by the border problem, and also the trade problem with Canada, and also getting involved in international matters, particularly wars. Now, you and I can argue all day that it's a complex world and we need to not recede in isolationism, but this is a strong tendency of American people, and the Republicans have been very able at capturing that gut feeling.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Okay with you if I jump in at this point?
Yes.
It is true that the Republicans have some ways of hooking in to a kind of patriotism that exists particularly in conservative America. That's one way of summarizing what I think you were alluding to. But the basic values, first of all, the basic conflict in American political is not at that level. The MAGA movement has hijacked American patriotism of a sort by, you know, make America great again. But the reality is, you could ask any of our friends in, you know, around the world, the Europeans, the Canadians, the Australians, you know, when Trump was president and as they contemplate a Trump future, are they thinking that's America becoming great again? On the contrary, a real patriot needs to know that American patriotism of the conservatives has been tied in for our whole lifetime with we are the leader of the free world. Now, everybody in the world with anything like a clear vision of Trump versus Biden knows that Biden represents the continuity of what those patriots cared about as America, as the leader of the free world. He is the leader of the free world. And there are reports coming from Europe as they contemplate the possibility that Trump may win. They realize that the free world will be without a leader, and they are scrambling to figure out how they will protect themselves in the absence of an America that stands behind them. So the truth of the matter is that a patriot is called upon not to vote for Trump, not to vote for the party that interfered with getting aid to Ukraine to fight the Russian fascists who invaded Ukraine. Not to vote for them, but to vote against them because they represent the very opposite of what the conservative America that you and I grew up in, Eisenhower's America, we beat the Nazis. That America is not represented by Trump. He is the opposite.
Well, there's no question about that. But, you know, people tend to get back to their gut and what affects them directly. And, you know, there was a show that didn't get a lot of attention on ABC where David Muir would go into people's homes and take one item after another inside the house and to see where it was manufactured. And of course, you know, 99% of the items were made in China. And I don't know if you remember that little show on ABC where David Muir would do that.
Let me ask you, just, is this really germane to what the fork of the road is that we're here to discuss? I mean, on the issue of American trade policy or whatever the thing is that you're leading to, is that, I mean, the choice between Trump and Biden isn't about that, is it?
In the minds of the people that will be voting for Trump, I think it is.
I'm here to talk about the truth. I mean, I know that people out there are deluded on one thing after another. They, you know, if climate change is a Chinese hoax or something like that, you know very well that there are a lot of people who have been skeptical about climate change. Do we need to talk about them? Only about how to bring them around to the truth, I'd say. We certainly don't need to deal with them with any kind of respect for the conclusions they've drawn because they've been propagandized for over a generation by the fossil fuel industry and by the political party they hired. So why would we want to talk about things at that level when we're talking about really what are we choosing between here in terms of democracy I should ask you, do you agree that democracy versus fascism is an apt, quick phrase to capture the essence of what the choice is in the presidential election?
I actually do. But if you'll remember back when Bill Clinton was being impeached or being held to account for his promiscuity, and the press couldn't understand why the public was not interested in that. And it was a great mystery. And the reason I think that they weren't is because the issues were more important to them than the man. And if they agreed a lot with what Bill Clinton was standing for and what they thought that he could do for them, the guy that they hired as president, then they were not going to be distracted by his affairs. And the same thing, I'm afraid, is happening today. You and I are wondering how this man could actually be the first one in 250 years to not stand for a peaceful transfer of power when he was saying that the election was rigged. I mean, this is incredible that this hasn't turned the whole public against him.
Yeah,
and the only explanation are these rather mundane issues.
I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. The issues that matter here in the Shenandoah Valley, Trump does absolutely nothing to improve their lives. He never tried to do anything to improve their lives. He wasn't interested in getting infrastructure done. He wasn't interested in protecting them from the pandemic. The one big thing that he accomplished with the Republicans in the Congress is he signed a tax cut bill that at the worst part of the business cycle gave $2 trillion to the corporate system and the billionaire class at the expense of average Americans. They support him it's not a transaction. I mean, there may be some people who think, oh, well, he gave us, he'll give us another tax cut, But actually, as it turns out, even the CEOs are turning away from them because they think he actually would be damaging to their interests. So I think that the evidence is that Trump has gained a place in people's hearts and minds that has nothing to do with the issues. It's basically at a level, and people talk about this as a cult. I think that most of his support isn't thinking I will benefit. He is expressing something. He has gained a kind of power over them. I have confessed at regular intervals how little I understand of how intelligent people, how did he grab them? I mean, I've looked into hypnotism to find, I've looked into previous cults of personality, but there are a lot of intelligent people that believe incredible things. I don't think that the essence of the problem is anything to do with the issues. I'm not the only one saying that the issues are irrelevant to American politics now. We don't deal in issues. The Republicans are going to have a convention soon. Do you think they're going to produce a platform this time? Last time they just said whatever Trump says. I mean, really, it was the first political party not to have a platform. Isn't that indicative of how little this has to do with issues?
A lot of us have thought that for some time now, and I'm beginning to think, given the fact that Trump continues to rise in the polls despite all of the negatives that have come out, including the 34 counts of felonious convictions, that we may be missing something if we don't go to the tried and true question of issues.
All right. Well, you do believe we are at a fork in the road that I characterized?
Absolutely, and it's a fork in
Okay.
the road for a democracy, and
So,
and that's being overlooked by the people that are voting. And now Trump is up 43% over Biden's 38%.
well, actually, the polls since the verdict have moved in Biden's direction on several different polls. It's still a very close race, but the Fox News poll had Biden up by 2, leading, and the numbers have gotten better. It's not like Trump is not in as good a position in the polls as he was a month ago.
It's 48 to 38, 43 to 38 as of today in favor of Trump.
Well, I don't know what you're looking at. I'm looking at things that are like 44, 42 Biden. But anyway, what is it when you talk about the issues, what is it you think that should be said by us in that context of we're actually at this fork in the road? So what is it about the issues that we should say if our goal is to help our audience move in the direction of let's take the correct force? What's the game plan here?
Yeah. Actually, you have mentioned it earlier, and that is the Democrats are not as good at messaging, unfortunately, as the Republicans. And it's as important to talk about issues and to emphasize issues as it is to try to solve them. And the Democrats have had a tendency to want to solve them as opposed to advertising them. And part of that is because pointing out some of the issues runs the risk of offending certain Democratic constituencies. But we should have been talking more about the border longer, and we should have been talking more about the trade deficit with China longer and more vociferously, as opposed to simply saying, well, there's no solution. You got to have free trade. Well, there's no solution. How do you protect a 2,000-mile border? That never stopped Trump. He's never been concerned about solutions. He's more concerned about marketing. So that's one of the issues.
Well, Fine. If we want to talk about issues, there's one issue that the Democrats have recognized as a powerful one. It's an issue on which even when Kansans, one of the reddest of the states, went to the polls, and the issue here is abortion. Even Kansans, when they went to the polls, voted for the side that the Democrats can campaign to, that they represent. This is the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, and all the repercussions of it. It has been identified as the most powerful issue for the Democrats to use, because the polls show that, I don't know, between 60 and 70% of Americans are on the Democrat side on this issue, and the Republicans are very vulnerable. It's really quite remarkable. I don't have anything very original to say about how the Republicans succeeded after a half a century of trying, overturning Roe v. Wade, and then people use the metaphor of the dog that caught the truck. Now they're in trouble over that issue. Secondarily, I gather that there's a sense that there's an issue about guns, that you can get big majorities of Americans that want certain things to be accomplished with respect to protecting the public safety. And the Republicans and the Supreme Court have made it very difficult. And it's been an issue that has generally worked for Republicans more than for Democrats. But some people seem to think that there's an avenue there to help save our democracy by using the issue of guns. But I think that there's going to be a lot that's on the issue of democracy. Do you think that the Democrats will be able to awaken a sizable number of people to the realities of this crisis?
The realities of which crisis?
Democracy versus fascism. I mean, something much more fundamental than any of these issues. The real issue is, will we continue to be the America that we were founded to be, or will we turn into some kind of top-down authoritarian system in which a few who are unaccountable are able to dominate and exploit the many?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like we can convert many Republican voters on that basis. Some maybe, but again, he keeps rising in the polls, and probably the biggest issue, and the one that we haven't mentioned, is inflation. It really has been rampant, and what can the Democrats do about that? You tell me, but we can keep pointing out, the Democrats can keep pointing out that it's a worldwide problem, and the U.S. has done better than most of the rest of the West in combating inflation. And we can also point out that, it's Trump himself that, quite properly, his administration provided funds to get us through the pandemic, which is, printing money, and that increased inflation. But none of those decrease the cost of goods. When the person
the rate of inflation. The rate of inflation at this point is one which is most of our lifetime would have been considered entirely acceptable. Three and a fraction, a little fraction percent at the most recent level. It's really calmed down. Now the prices don't come down after you've had inflation. That just doesn't happen. So it still seems expensive if you're stuck at that price, but they've stopped rising. And you're right. The American record is as good as any developed industrial world. But I think that there actually is a problem which I don't fully understand that operates at a different level. Why is it that most people, it's always been hard to get people to realize sort of the truth if it requires looking at a body of information. But why is it that we have a country in which over half the people think we're in a recession, and they think that our unemployment rate is at a 50-year high or something, where it's actually at around a 50-year low. There's something going on there I don't quite get. Usually, we've lived through a number of recessions, and usually there's a lot going on that you can sort of recognize that these are harder times. Um, Everything in the news sort of reflects layoffs, and then all kinds of stuff go on. Why is it that that Biden doesn't get credit for what's factually a pretty good record of achievement on the economic front? I mean, Reagan was in '84 was riding on our climbing out of the deep recession of '80, '82. And he got massively reelected because people gave him credit for morning in America. What's it? I feel like there's something not rational that's in the way of people recognizing the state of the economy. And by the way, 70% of individual families, they say their situation is good, but they think the nation's in a mess. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's because the media is in a mess. And we, in the last 20 years or so, we've gone from a fairly objective journalistic environment to one that's simply partisan. You have Fox News and all these other networks that have proliferated first through cable news and then through the internet, so that people are only know what they hear and read. And
you're so right, and it's been one of the disappointments. I guess I always had a pretty high opinion of my fellow human beings. It's been a disappointment that people can't see through. I mean, if people are still watching Fox News,
yeah,
even though a whole legal process laid out for everybody to see just what the hell was going on there, that led to their having to pay the better part of $1 billion for having lied to their public about a very fundamental thing, trying to overthrow an election with lies to them, deceiving them about what had happened in the election. And they said, why don't they? I mean, yeah. You if you're only watching Fox News, you'll only know so much. But there's so much evidence that they're complete fakes. I mean, there's transcripts of what Tucker Carlson had to say about Trump. I hate him with a passion. Geez, if he hated Trump with a passion and he was toadying up to him and building him up in all these ways at the same time, how can you not conclude these people cannot be trusted? I don't get it. They're not stupid people. Why are they still watching Fox? And on climate change, they've been sold a bill of goods for you know this quite well, I expect. The Republican Party's been lying about climate change for 30 years or 40 years? And now it's obvious to anybody who's the least bit aware that the climate is changing and that the scientists' warnings from more than 30 years ago were valid, and that the Republican Party's been lying to them about something that their children and grandchildren are going to suffer from. How do they stay connected with those things when all that's so clear?
Yeah. It's a mystery, but politics is always a complicated combination of a number of issues. And it's just hard to boil it down to one or two things. We look for comprehensive solutions, but they're just, they're 5 or 10 major issues in this particular campaign. And I just think we have to be careful about attributing it all to the cult of Trump. I've been
Oh,
doing that.
it's not all to the cult of Trump. I mean, take health insurance, take Obamacare. That's also one of the issues on the ballot. And the Republicans were never willing to accept the outcome of the democratic process with respect to Obamacare. There was repeal, repeal, repeal. That's another issue that in terms of the truth and people's actual interests, it should be possible between a decent messaging and decent intelligence being applied by the people receiving the message. It should be obvious that it is in their interest to support a party that is interested in helping protect them, like the citizens of every other advanced society, against being wiped out financially by a health crisis. Isn't that another issue that I mean, isn't the constructive and the destructive almost without exception on the side of the Democrats? In this instance, the way things have evolved, even immigration, which you're right in your critique about the Democrats on immigration. Immigration is problematic. It always seems to feed the fascistic force in a lot of societies. And the Democrats have been slow to come around, but Biden did come around. They created a deal. The deal was ready to move forward, and Trump said, no, I want the issue. He stood in the way of a solution. So I don't know whether you can convey to the American people what happened, but the truth about what happened is that Trump revealed himself to be completely indifferent to solving the problem and just interested in serving himself, which is always what he does.
Yeah.
So if the Democrats can message a way so that the people who care about immigration realize that Trump is not their friend on this issue and that Biden was willing to sign something which was basically one of their wish lists, then it can work on the side of saving democracy rather than empowering fascism.
Well, there was a reporter that was interviewing Trump supporters, on the street, so to speak. And one of the people that he interviewed asked him a question. He says, why is it that most of the people who support Biden have college degrees? Now, why do you think that is? What are they telling these students in college? So,
I don't understand that second part of students thing, but go ahead.
I keep coming back to, in my own mind, about this inability. It's hard to vote for someone that you don't identify with. And so many people can identify more easily with Trump than they can with Biden and often the Democratic candidate.
Now, let analyze that a little bit for us. I'm not saying you're wrong. There's a way in which I think that you're right. On the one hand, Trump was born into great wealth.
I know
his whole life story is one with which is complete. I mean, he didn't grow up on some farm in Iowa, he wasn't the son of a steel worker or anything like that. Joe Biden's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So tell me, why is it easier for people to identify? What do you think the nature of the identification is when Biden's life is way more typical of their condition than Trump's?
Yeah, well, people go by their instincts, and they hear Trump speak, and the way he says it, and what he says, right. And they either identify with him or they don't. And it turns out
I think
that they
you're
have
right.
Identified with him.
So what? And that's where most of my thinking goes in trying to understand. I think that Trump expresses something at the level of emotion and passion that is irresistible to more people than I would have imagined. I mean, I've studied I've studied Hitler and Stalin, and, the rise of the Nazis and child rearing practices in Germany in the century before 1933, and how people get prepared to respond to a message that a gifted orator uh, was bringing out of them and creating a bond that was irresistible, so that they could stand in uniform lines and seek Heil as if they were one person and goose step past him like a well-oiled machine, because he was expressing something. And Trump isn't the same thing, but I think it's at that level. I mean, he's never being friendly to the other side. He's always dripping scorn and throwing insults. I mean, by the way, I should say that we're going to be having a presidential debate, and one of the things that we're going to find out is, is Trump going to behave like a normal presidential candidate with the muting of the mics and his having decided that it was wrong to interrupt Biden all the time in 2020? Or are we going to see something which is like we Americans never saw in a presidential bid remotely before Trump?
Yeah. Yeah, the debate tonight will be very important, and it could be a turning point in favor of Biden. But just to go to the identification and the appeal to the masses thing, Hitler came to power partially and largely aided by Germany coming out of the dregs of World War I. And he only had, 25% support or something like that from the population. So he was aided by the conditions. In Trump's case, it's extraordinary that he has apparently been able to do this largely just by this identification and appeal. So it's even more remarkable and more of a challenge to you as an analyst to try again to figure out why this is happening.
Well, I like that invitation, because I actually have written a fair amount about this. And let me just say, my written works are available in a lot of them on abetterhumanstory.org. One of the things that I say is that I've studied in depth 3 times where a major force of brokenness was able to take control. One was the lead up to this American Civil War. One was the progression or deterioration of Germany through a series of traumas from between 1914 and 1933, when Hitler, there's World War I and there's the massive inflation, and anyway, just a lot of trauma for a lot of people, and that created the opportunity for a force of brokenness to seize control in the form of the Nazi movement. And then there's what's happened in America, and I trace it to, I think that the first Bush was a normal Republican president leading a still normal Republican Party. And then a transformation occurred from the time that Clinton was elected, and figures like Limbaugh and Gingrich and Fox News, that there's been a progression. And what was achieved in the South, in the lead up to the Civil War, around a genuinely huge issue for the country, which is slavery, that had been a difficult thing since before 1820. That threatened to split the nation apart all those years and got papered over. That was a huge issue. Not a big surprise that if you don't negotiate that kind of terrible problem successfully with politics, you're going to end up with a lot of brokenness in the system. And so we get the American Civil War. With Germany, there's all those other traumas, World War One and the massive inflation and the Treaty of Versailles, which was such a blunder on the part of the victors in World War One. And then it breaks the country apart and allows a force of growth. With us in America, since the first Bush left the White House, what's happened in conservative America has been a rise of a force that's been able to find geniuses of propaganda. So even without an issue, even without trauma, they were able to poison people's minds. Like America in 1992 was still basically, I think, as healthy as the one that you and I grew up in. But you could start selling people on the idea that people on the other side are your enemies, that they're baby killers, that the people who want to protect the environment are eco-Nazis or eco-fascists, that women who want to rebalance some of the power in our society are feminazis. Get people to think in certain ways. You're on the air 3 hours a day. Man, that's why I went into radio, by the way. I saw that happening in the early 90s, and I got a foothold here at our biggest AM station, WSVA, to try to counter what he was doing. But you could see he was moving people's minds over enough years. And Trump isn't the cause of this. By 2015, what had happened to the minds of the good people that I talk with on the radio show, who actually really sincerely believed in things that they're supporting the destruction of now. I lost my way in that sentence. Not to put you on the spot, but do you remember where I was going?
Well, you're talking about the influence of Rush Limbaugh and other talk show hosts.
Yeah. 3 hours a day, you can really marinate people's minds. And then, in 1997, Fox comes on. You probably have read stories about people whose, here's an example, a woman who lives in this area. Her mother got to be in an area where only Fox News was available. And she underwent a personality change over time. She became so scared and so enrageable that there's a process that seems possible to effect even in an open society like ours. People have access to all the information, yet it seems it's been demonstrated. You found unbelievable, I find unbelievable. You can isolate people's minds so that they're listening only to you. And even though they're swimming in a sea where the truth is all around them, you can lead them into the place where they believe something so that by 2015, they can look at somebody like Donald Trump and say, I want him to be our president.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the Republic, I don't think more than a handful of people on the Republic who supported Ronald Reagan in the 1980s would have looked at somebody who is behaving like Donald Trump in the 2015, 2016 campaign and said, yeah, that's the kind of person who should be sitting in the Oval Office.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to demonize the other side to allow that to happen. A lot of people will say, well, in the 2016 election as well as this one, it's not so much that I favored Trump, it's that I didn't like Hillary. And now they have demonized a person that you wouldn't think was capable of being demonized, Biden, to the extent that they're now saying that about Biden. There's another phenomenon that takes place as we have seen what you and I think is the deterioration of the Republican Party. People that were traditionally Republican are often say, well, I don't like either party. And that simply means that they have been traditionally a Republican. They can't anymore because of the nature of someone like Trump and the obvious bias shown by the Senate and ignoring his impeachable offenses and not allowing Garland to be considered as a justice of the Supreme Court and so forth. So they're pushed only to the point of, well, I'm tired of politics, and I just don't. I think both parties are bad. But getting them to move to, buy Ford instead of Chevrolet if they have bought Chevrolet all of their life is, a difficult proposition. And then if there's something that happens that allows them to rally again for the Republican candidate, like rampant inflation or more border scenes, and then if the polls go up, they say, well, maybe our candidate's not, so maybe I can vote Republican again. So I think that may be what we're seeing gathering steam in the polls now.
I think that, well, you keep on saying that Trump is rising in the polls. I keep on saying that's not, I don't believe that's the case.
Well, for him to be considered by any more than 15% of the population is rising in the polls, in my opinion.
I mean, that any American who's, I mean, like I said in that piece, I don't believe that more than a third of people would vote for him if they knew what he represented. I don't know that for a fact. It's just my feeling. And there's been a lot of evidence that, like in 2022, the most MAGA candidates in 2022 were defeated in New Hampshire and Pennsylvania and in Georgia and in Arizona. It looked like those were winnable Republican seats, but if they were too MAGA, there would be 5 to 7% of people who would have voted for a good Republican, but they can't vote for this one. And now Trump and the Trump party have gone way further in that same direction. There's just an abundance of material that can be used in messaging and campaign ads that paint a very scary picture that's more extreme than, say, voting for Kari Lake in Arizona or Herschel Walker in Georgia. This is some really crazy stuff that I don't think, but what you say is true, that there are a lot of people for whom the partisan identification is very hard to overcome. And that's why it's something like Adam Kinzinger's coming out like he did with this video saying, I'm going to support Biden. He says in that video, I never would have guessed I'd ever vote for a Democrat for president. And I bet we'll be hearing also from Liz Cheney. And it's disappointing that we're not going to be hearing from, Nikki Haley, for example. She should have done that. I bet she's not even helping herself by selling out. I mean, she's told people during that brief period when she was the alternative to Trump, she's told people why he cannot be allowed to assume the presidency. The quotations are there, the videos are there. Yet now she's supporting Trump. She thinks it would kill her politically. I imagine. I don't know what she thinks to say I'm coming out for Biden like Adam Kinzinger did. But geez, man, what kind of profile and courage do you need to have at a moment like this?
Yeah. Well, another worrisome trend is the Heritage Foundation's putting out Project 2025. And that has some very dark portions to that. And it would represent
part of the picture of fascism. It's part of the picture of fascism. It is part of that. Project 2025 is here's a chunk to help transform the American kind of government into another one that's more amenable to being manipulated by a fascist dictator.
That's correct. And that would be your defense to the portion of Project 2025 that seeks to dismantle what they call the deep state, which is actually the administrative state, the administrative branch of the federal government.
Which is a big step forward in helping a society run decently.
And, if that appeals to the voter on a superficial basis, at least, of, reducing the bureaucracy and making government more efficient and less cumbersome and bureaucratic, what would be your response to that to the voter?
Well, you raised the question a while before. I don't know exactly what you were thinking when you talked about, how college-educated people are tending to vote Democratic more. I mean, there's been a movement, and I'm not sure how to make sense of it. I mean, part of it is college-educated people. The economy is skewed so that the gap between people with a college degree and people with just a high school degree or less has widened, and so there's frustration and anger in areas where people are falling behind. I think there are studies that show that red America has become a smaller part of our GDP as a nation than blue America. So I mean, that's part of it. But I also think that part of it is maybe if you go get a college degree, maybe it's the education or maybe it's the non-randomness of who goes, but that you're able to understand something of a concept. But, I have a lot of respect for average human intelligence. I'm wrestling with this whole question of, but I've seen people with average human intelligence make a lot of themselves in various manifestations of intelligence. So it's hard for me to understand why it would be difficult for a campaign to let the American people know about this Project 2025 in a way that gets the main point across.
Yeah.
I mean, but then there's a part of me which has watched how people don't get stuff, and I think, well, maybe the country's been dumbed down, or maybe something's happened, like the hypnotism thing, where the intelligence has gotten switched off whenever they enter into the political realm. I sometimes conceptualize it in terms of modules that you can have, almost like when you walk into church, you get into your church state of mind or something. Well, they've been trained when they get into politics, they get into this politics state of mind where they where they're not able to see, like, climate change is real, and they're not able to see 2025 is a threat. I don't know. This is hypothetical on my part, but I am somewhat. I don't feel confident that if I were messaging to the conservatives, and I do. I work every week to make a polished piece that makes an important point, and I don't feel confident that it gets across.
Yeah.
So 2025 is what you're talking about. That should be an issue. It's related to democracy versus fascism, but it may not be. I think quotations from Trump talking about being a dictator on day one, and how he's going to overthrow the Constitution, or however he put it. I mean, there are quotations you can put on that are actually do convey something that people maybe can get it from there.
Well, you think about the fact that apparently a sizable percentage of the population still believes that the election was rigged. They believe Trump's propaganda and the Republican propaganda that his prosecution for various crimes has been orchestrated by the Biden administration. I mean, this is just absolutely incredible.
Those are the two
And
things that I talk about as being how can intelligent people not know the truth about those two things? I mean, there are mountains of evidence. I mean, it's just not yet. The leader says such and such. I did nothing. I did everything right. I did nothing wrong. The election was stolen from me, and they believe it. How does that work?
And, you know, the number of impeachments that we've had in our 250-year history, Trump had what, half of those in his one term. And it's not, and
And the
it's the
Clinton,
Democrats' fault. It's somehow not related to anything he did.
oh, and also, you know, it's all laid out. You know, I follow the various indictments and investigations and stuff pretty closely. So, you know, I mean, the evidence that Trump is a criminal is just beyond doubt. I mean, we're not on a jury, we're citizens, and it has been shown beyond a reasonable doubt. Yet you're right. A whole lot of people, and not stupid people, or not only stupid people, believe that it's just been politically motivated. The evidence is right there that that Biden's Justice Department actually erred in the opposite direction. They wanted to avoid confronting Trump, and they made mistakes in that direction. But they believe that. How does that work? I think there's just a third of Americans that we just have to write off for now. On the other side of the election, we can ask ourselves, how can we recover some of the basic human goodness that somehow has gotten led over to the dark side?
Well, you know, here's one theory. If you have social changes that conflict with traditional religious values like same-sex marriage and just a whole liberalization of the concept of gender and the binary gender tradition. If this confuses people, that might cause them to question the media. And if you can't believe what you're hearing in the media, and you can't believe what's going on in the country, and people are telling you as well that we somehow have to get off of fossil fuels, and you can't run your cars on gasoline anymore, and you have to transform the whole energy industry, then what can you believe? And the only source of information is are conspiracies that happen to agree with your view of the world. So that casts you into a conspiratorial mindset. And then truth through legitimate sources becomes non-existent.
Well, I have argued consistently that this problem that we have of the rise of this destructive force taking over one of our two major political parties is a systemic problem. It's not the result only of what happened on the right. It was also a function of the failure of the other side of the power system to perceive well what was rising and to combat it effectively. I've been saying that, well, in some ways, even in the 1990s, but certainly since it became clear to me what had taken over the right. In 2004, it took over my life to have seen that. The thing that we need to stress is that has been a battle to be fought that became visible long time ago that wasn't fought. The Democrats were still talking about my friends across the aisle after the Republican Party had become sworn enemies. I would say, for example, that if in 2008, Barack Obama having won the presidency at that juncture, with the state of play in the country being as it was then, and there was plenty wrong with it then, that it was a result of the W administration and its divisiveness and its abuse of the war on terror and all that stuff. But if when Barack Obama had the political spirit and skills of FDR, that we would not be in this place now, 14 years later. Is it 14 years since 2008? That Barack Obama took office with the goal of being a transformational president. There was reference to FDR, who took over in 1933 with the country in the depths of the Depression and recreated the country in some fairly fundamental ways. If Obama had the ability to use his power to win the battle as it was waged against him by a Republican Party that we know factually decided even before he was inaugurated they were going to make him fail. I've never seen something so incredible as Obama's either failure to understand that he had enemies or his inability to deal with enemies the way they needed to be dealt with. I think he's a splendid human being, but he forfeited the battle he was elected to fight. And what we need to bring people back, I mean, everybody has got problems with certain kinds of social change. But if you've got propagandists making people feel that their marriage depends on these people not being able to have anything like a marriage, if they're being taught that day after day, it's a threat to their marriage. And that's what a lot of people on the conservative side have said. That's not a given that they're going to be thinking about what kind of world am I going to live in. You know, even these cultural issues, and they're real, they're difficult. There have been cultural changes, and making those cultural changes isn't going to be easy. But with the right kind of leadership, you can get people behind things like Roosevelt was able to get people behind the Tennessee Valley Authority and the the electrification of rural America and the beginnings of Social Security and and rights of workers and the National Labor Relations Act and a whole bunch of stuff that transformed the country into something that was different and better.
Yeah.
So there's been a failure in terms of what we've done as an alternative.
The whole recent addition to the Republican Party, the movement conservatism, so-called movement conservatism, is designed to roll back the New Deal.
Yeah, but the fact that you and I, you're old enough to remember President Eisenhower, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that Republican Party refused to allow the John Birch Society to have anything to do with it. And even the first Bush, when David Duke of the Ku Klux Klan was a Republican nominee for some office in Louisiana, I think it was, the president made a public statement disavowing him. But, you know, that's not the Republican Party we have today. You know, there's been a change, and there's a solid middle of America that's not for the John Birch Society type conspiracy theories, that's not for the Ku Klux Klan kind of white supremacy, that could be gathered together to form a coalition of people with constructive intentions. If you had leadership like FDR, who said, I welcome their hatred about those malefactors of great wealth that were up against him to try to keep this country from providing any kind of equality to working people.
Right. Yeah, I think you make a very good point about the importance of leadership. Changing the subject just a little bit, what do you think Trump means when he says you're not going to have a country anymore if you don't go out there and fight? When he says when we know what we mean, we're on the verge of not having a country anymore. But what does he mean?
Well, the thing is about Trump's communications is he doesn't have to mean anything. I mean, he's an amazing for somebody like me. You know, I regard myself as, you know, raised to be a truth teller. You know, to watch somebody for whom the truth isn't even a speed bump. You know, he's continually. I mean, my trip is, well, let me look, let me try to understand, let me look at the evidence, draw conclusions rationally. You know, that's how I come to what he's not looking to see, well, what's the reality. He's tuned in on his base. He's got some kind of genius for reading them, I think. And he's asking, what can I say now that will have the effect on them that I want? So if I say you're going to lose your country, you know, that they don't have, I'm not thinking about anything. They don't have to think about anything. It's just, you know, damn it, I've watched a million movies about, you know, the commies taking over or whatever, you know. Yeah, and it's going to bring up in them both the fear, or the fear of loss of something that I hold dear, and the rage to go up, you know, to climb the tree and be a sniper and pick them off. You know, that's what he's doing. It's the same thing as with Carnage America. I mean, you get Trump up there talking about the state of America. Hello, you know. That's not how it is out there. I mean, he conjures up this like murders at every turn. I mean, in these blue cities where the murder rate's been declining by unprecedented percentages. His inaugural address in 2017 was all about describing America as a country like you wouldn't want to be out on the street without a bulletproof vest. That's not the America we live in.
Yeah.
But he paints a picture that will have the effect on his base that he wants.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. It really is.
Well, I should probably bring this segment to a close. I appreciate your having been here. I hope I wasn't too defiant of the directions you were pointing in. I felt very stimulated by each thing that you threw, the knuckleball, the changeup, the slider, occasionally a spitter,
Spitball.
and let's. You know, I'm so anxious. I don't know how you feel about this debate. As I get older, I get less able to deal with tension. I don't know if it's age or if it's because I've been looking at this America teetering on the edge, and as I have for 20 years. But I may just record the debate so I can dole it out to myself. I just will be very anxious watching this thing. Do you have any of that feeling?
I have the feeling that I'm less able to deal with tension as I get older. I think that's probably a function of age.
So you do experience that as, you know, like when you were younger, you could deal with more stress and such.
I have to admit that I have experienced that, yes. And I've heard other people as they get older say that as well.
Yeah. The only reason I don't attribute it just to age is that when I first took on the mission of raising the alarm about what was going on in America in 2004, it was only 3 years later that I felt like I was suffering from PTSD for the first time in my life, from staring at the darkness that was gathering. So that was rather quick for it to be aging. So for me, it feels like it's a combination of things. But anyway, I wish the country well. Sometime we could talk about how history sometimes hinges on small things, particular things that, is tonight's debate going to be determined? I mean, everybody says it could have a big impact in either direction. Is it possible that whether we're a democracy 5 years from now depends on what happens tonight?
It is possible, yes.
Yeah.
It's not necessary, but it's possible.
Well, I like watching movies about D-Day because I know it's going to succeed ultimately. I can even deal with 1942 with the Patton movie because I know that even though we're getting clobbered in the early months of the year, both in North Africa and South Pacific, I know we're going to stick it to them, and we're going to climb back up there, and we're going to eventually march into Berlin, or maybe we didn't march into Berlin. But this time we're actually at a fork in the road and not in a position to know which fork we're going to take as a country. How optimistic are you? You've sounded pretty pessimistic, I guess, with the way you keep on saying that Trump's rising in the polls. Am I right that if you had to bet purely rationally right now, you would bet that the next president of the United States to be inaugurated in January is going to be Donald Trump?
Well, I just from the polls, you'd have to say that, but I can't bring myself to say it because it's so important that he not be the next president. But when I try to argue with rank and file Republicans that you otherwise think are pretty decent people, and they seem to be getting warmer and warmer to Trump, and really are committed to vote for him, then I'm very pessimistic.
Well, I appreciate that you have those conversations. I find them very difficult. I've talked here previously about April and I having a couple of Republican couples that we get together with and have a very friendly, good time. But the rule is not talk politics because that gets in the way. So I believe if I had to put money down, I would still put money that the American people are going to defeat Trump, reject Trump and Trumpism. It's not going to be the blowout that half a year ago I thought maybe it could be. I wish I could say I could see that happening. But there's a fellow I'm very impressed with who's got a big following and shows up on TV. He's a Democratic political analyst named Simon Rosenberg, who runs what's called the Hopium Chronicles. Hopium meaning hope. Maybe it's the opiate of the people. I don't know. But he makes a very strong case for why he thinks he'd much rather be where the Biden world is in this contest than where the Trump world is. And I think it's a compelling case, but there's so much going on in America that seems crazy and somewhat inexplicable to me, that I feel like I can't be confident. Even if there's a good messaging campaign, can anything get through? To whom might it get through? The state of consciousness in America is the root of the problem right now. We got to win the election first, and then we got to heal a country that's going to have problems no matter who wins this election. Anyway, thank you again, Bishop. Appreciate your giving of your time and your thoughts and stimulating a good conversation.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I gotta hide this thing. Okay, so that was the conversation about a fork in the road for America. There's a lot of things that we didn't talk about with respect to that fork. I mean, we didn't talk about what is the effect on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. What is the effect on the future of NATO? Well, some other topics that I have in mind. So, a hypothesis about some men's frustration at being denied the heroic role of protector. And I call this a hypothesis because it's just sort of like an intuitive sense that there's probably something to this, but I don't really know. But it came to me, and it was interesting enough to me to want to try to put it out there. I have talked before about that a lot of men, I think a lot of the men who are in the Trumpian base have been pushed in that direction because of some of the changes that have occurred in American culture that pertain to the roles of men and women and the relationships between men and women. This is part and parcel, I suppose, of some of the issues that Bishop raised about same-sex marriage and transgender and stuff like that. But change in the culture have impacts on people. People are brought up to have certain expectations, certain attitudes, and certain needs. So I'm a aficionado of old movies. I have a DVR. I tune into Turner Classic Movies, especially, and I DVR films from sometimes even before the talkies, but it's certainly the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and onward. And I think that I can intuit, partly because I grew up on some of the mythologies that those movies presented. And those mythologies gave men a role in the world and in relationship to their women folk, of being protectors. You watch the old westerns or frontier movies, or occasionally there's the woman gets to play a role in protecting herself. She can load a rifle and she can fire a rifle, but for the most part, the men are important protectors in a world where there are hostile powers and there are dangers, natural and social, outlaws, and women are treated by the good guys as valued objects for whom they perform the essential role as protector. I grew up having my fantasies about girls, and I had fantasies about girls from the age of 5 on, would sometimes involve playing that kind of a role. Guns do play a part in some of those fantasies, especially when I was a boy. Less so but the man as a protector of the woman. These movies infuse with some real, almost vibrant quality. I was going to say numinous, but maybe not to that extent. But it's warm. It's of the heart. It's of the bicep. And the world that we live in America, in this era, is not one that really calls for that, and anything like the way that was depicted in the movies. There's, we don't get attacked by, hostile Indians. We don't have outlaws shooting up the saloon. It's a pretty domesticated seed, and one in which women are no longer told how to be helpless. April and I, when we watch some of these movies together, she observes the women are always falling down. I mean, the man and the woman are running away from the threat to get safety, and of course the woman falls down, and the man has to come back and help her to her feet. Yeah, but that's not what women are like in the movies anymore. We've got women who are able to take on professional fighter men. If they've mastered the martial arts well enough. Kill Bill, it's a different world, and I sort of wonder about the men that I live among in this rural Virginia area, men for whom fathers and sons going out hunting is, an important part of the child rearing practice and the transmission of culture. And for a man to grow up sort of being geared toward playing that role that you can see in the movies of the 40s, 50s, 60s, less so in the 60s, maybe. Things started changing then in a lot of ways. I can imagine that that's painful and frustrating. And I did do a previous video on the that in a larger sense about changes in the power and status of men versus women. I also have an essay about that on my website, betterhumanstory.org. But now I'm thinking about maybe if you have that need, that would make the image of a threat a motivated thing to believe. So that, like Bishop asked me, what do I make about his telling his base, we got to win or you're going to lose your country. Well, that kind of a threat calls for somebody to fight. I mean, I think about sort of right-wing inspired from way back when, some kind of Red October, a fantasy about what if the Russians, the Soviets, took over the country, how to launch a guerrilla war against them. I had a fantasy about that when I was in high school, actually. There's a place I lived in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, and there's a little park that's about 15, 20 miles north of Winona, Minnesota, on the Mississippi River, where that piece of land just really captured my love. During the winter, I would envision the stream that ran through it and all the greenery that grew in the stream and around it, and the hill, and the view from the hill overlooked a railroad and the Mississippi River and a Highway 61, Bob Dylan's highway. So I would lie in bed just enjoying myself, having a fantasy of what if the Russians took over, the Soviets, I would have called them, I guess, then. And I would run a guerrilla operation. Well, I wonder whether men who have grown up with that kind of heroic role of a guy with a gun who's going to be able to save our country, um, is part of what's going on that draws a lot of young men of a certain, I don't know, maybe social class where they've gotten in some ways kicked in the teeth, maybe. I think so, but one of the ways they've been kicked in the teeth is that they're now operating in a world where, as a man in relation to a woman, they don't have the role that they were expecting, and they're not as powerful, and they're not as high status, and they don't have the role of protector. And so there may be a motivation to believe that the other side is a bunch of enemies. We kids would break up into, cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, uh, all kinds of, us Americans against the Germans, whatever we dig our forts and stuff like that. Maybe there's a motivation for wanting to believe that they really are coming for your guns, that they are baby killers, that what we need is men who will fight against this force on the other side. Maybe somebody like Rush Limbaugh could play into that. At the time, I was never aware that he was leaning, obviously, into that male protector thing. But you create an enemy anyway that has to be fought and defeated. Not somebody you work with to achieve some mutually agreed common purpose. I don't know if that's what's going on or not. Like I said, it's a hypothesis. Well, I think I'm going to skip over 3 ways of perceiving the reality of a force of evil. And this gets into the larger scale ideas I have about the human story. I mean, most of what we've been talking about today has got to do with the crisis in America. And I do believe that the crisis in America is best understood if you see it in the context of the larger challenge that we faced as a species that created civilization. That's the big idea. That's what the parable of the tribes, the problem of power in social evolution is about. That is the sort of one of the foundational ideas about why we're struggling to create a human world that can survive for the whole long haul, and in which people can thrive. Why we're dealing with something like a political party that, if you look at that used to be a normal American political party, which is to say a mixture of constructive and destructive components, forces, working together as that mixture and interacting with another political party, which was also a mixture of, let's just say good and evil. But when you've got a political party that gets to the point where virtually everything it does or everything it says has the effect of making the world in worse shape. And I do believe that we are at that point. I can't think of any exception with respect to today's Republican Party. And I don't feel that way about the America's Conservative Party prior to, well, the transformation, as I understand it, has taken place since the rise of Limbaugh and Gingrich as the major voices of the party. Each one of those people is sociopathic in a way that Ronald Reagan, for example, was not. They profess to be, continuing Ronald Reagan's Republican Party, but they weren't. And you get to a point where, by virtue of, and however things unfolded in that party and in the political system in general, where a lot of unprecedented stuff that should have been punished was instead rewarded. And so that force got more powerful. I mean, for example, it has been since Jimmy Carter that the Republican Party has dealt with any Democratic president as if, okay, he's a legitimate president. We got to work with him. That's what our job is. The people hired us to do our job in the Congress, and they hired this guy to sit in the White House and perform the important functions. They did that with Jimmy Carter in a normal degree. They didn't do it with Bill Clinton. They started trying to make him out to be a serial killer, very early. And they continued to move. They didn't impeach him because, he's done something impeachable. They were looking for something to impeach him for. I don't know any time in American history that any political party in opposition was spending its time looking for, where's there a chink in his armor big enough for us to be able to drive a spear through? We talked about the impeachment. People supported Clinton. Bishop Dansby suggested, and I didn't respond at that time because he was doing a good job for them on the issues. I think that's important. But I think the polls also indicated that they felt that it was unjustified to utilize Monica Lewinsky's blue dress to actually remove a president from office. Misbehavior by presidents is not particularly new. JFK, I think if I would rather my daughter be married to Bill Clinton, I think, than to JFK from what I've read in terms of marital fidelity. But anyway, this was a party that was unwilling to accept that the people get to hire who's going to wield the power. Those who get elected have the job of working together as best they can to do what they think is best for the country. And they're not going to agree on everything, but on the basis of what they can agree on, they owe it to the nation, to the people to do that. When have we last seen the Republican Party deal that way? I do feel that that Clinton impeachment takes us up to W's presidency. I believe W's presidency is something that already showed a profound breakdown away from a normal American political force, a major party political force. The torture and the torture memo would be one exhibit in the case that I would make to support that. I was already very scared that we were on the road to fascism during starting at near the end of 2004, I guess I would say, and all the way until the Obama won the election of 2008. Obama was not treated as a legitimate president. Obamacare, I alluded to this a moment ago, but we have a framework for making decisions together as a society. That's what our founders gave us. We have a way of deciding big issues, and there are procedures for doing that. And the means by which we arrived at Obamacare were as thoroughly a legitimate way of making a decision in terms of the constitutional process in Congress and the presidency, elections and platforms. Obama ran on it. The Congress debated it. It got passed. And there was nothing whatsoever that was extreme about it. In fact, everybody who studied the issue, which includes me, knew that We were only going part way toward what almost every other decent society was doing for its people with respect to health care. It was very moderate. But the Republicans would not accept it. I mean, that by itself, maybe there's some other example in American history. I mean, I've written about American history in books. I've taught American history to bright 16 and 17-year-olds. I know a little bit of American history. Maybe I missed something. But I'm not aware of any time that a process like that, to make a decision like that, and it was obviously a decision that needed to be made because we were squandering trillions of dollars. I mean, I think $1 trillion a year or something like that. We were paying twice as much to get something that was less effective at providing good health care for the American people than all the other countries like in Western Europe and Australia and all the rest of them. Obviously, we were losing, what was it, 25,000 or 50,000 extra lives a year because we had this lousy system that was so expensive. Obviously, we needed to do something about it. The Democrats managed to accomplish it. Already it was obvious that there was something had gone wrong with a party that wouldn't. First of all, there were a lot of Republican ideas in this thing. In fact, it was fashioned around what Mitt Romney had done as governor of Massachusetts. It was not extreme. He was a Republican governor of Massachusetts, by the way. But they wouldn't accept that. You know, this is the kind of thing that the Democrats should have highlighted. This is indefensible. The whole obstruction across the board that the Republicans decided on before Obama got inaugurated is inherently indefensible. I mean, it is a betrayal of the nation. Not hard to show. Yet in 2010 and then again in 2014, the Democrats didn't even campaign on the indefensibility of what the Republicans were doing. They just allowed the force to get more and more powerful. So yeah, I love President Obama as a person. I read his book before when around the time of the South Carolina primary. I became a devotee of Obama as he was fighting for the nomination with Hillary Clinton being the runner-up. I thought that book was kind of a wonderful book. I recommend it highly. And I don't know of any other president that's written so fine of a work in human and literary terms. JFK wrote Profiles in Courage and got the Pulitzer. I don't even think he actually was the one who wrote it, but I'm not sure about that. But Obama did write this book, and it was really quite excellent. And I thought all he had to do is, show the same degree of cleverness that he'd shown in beating Hillary, in dealing with the opposition. And he came into office with something 80% approval ratings, really, really big approval ratings. And then he just showed no ability to fight or no awareness of the need to fight. So this is why it's a systemic problem. It's kind of interesting to look at why one party was turning into this thing and the other party was turning into the opposite. And what the Republican Party was becoming was a force that was consistently doing things that were destructive, not at all interested in making things better. So in a sense, they behaved a lot like they were being run by an evil force. I define evil as a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse in the human world, more broken. And Obama represented the good. I mean, I'm not aware of his having proposed anything that wouldn't have been beneficial to have implemented, enacted by Congress, implemented in the country. Maybe somebody could make a case. With Clinton, I can look at some things that, these were not so good. He may have been driven to it because liberalism had become so weak in the wake of Carter and Reagan. So maybe he had to do what he did about crime reform and stuff like that. But a lot of it turned out to not be so good. But Obama, I think, always was proposing decent stuff. But he had no idea how to deal with a political force that was going to try to make him fail. That was their top priority in his first term, and they continued to block him achieving anything legislatively. They showed no interest. This is the transformation of a Republican Party being taken over by a coherent force that gradually was being rewarded for the worst parts of it, that were willing to sacrifice any possibilities of constructive action if they could see a way to get more power. And that pretty much explains everything that happened under, increasingly under Clinton and under W. I mean, W, what all did he propose to make things better? The adding pharmaceuticals to Medicare. Okay, I kind of like that. I think there were some corrupt elements into how that thing got shaped, but I'll accept that was an accomplishment. What else did he try to do? Thinking constructively seemed to no longer be the what part of the mission of a political party. And that's indefensible, but the other political party, while it stood for good things, did not have the necessary capacity to fight and win a battle against what they were up against. That's the title of that book over there, What We're Up Against, 2015. It was written entirely before it became Trump jumped into the political arena, and it was written with a sense of urgency, because I thought we were on the knife's edge of falling over into fascism. So, looking at the amount of time, that was actually what led me to begin to think about the force of evil, a coherent force that consisted. Because if everything it says and does as an entity, a political party is not one thing, but it also is one thing. It acts as a coherent force. And if everything it does is non-randomly, like on the wrong side, on climate change, on relationship between the races, on the gulf of inequality between the richest and the rest, thing after thing, if it's you got to infer that, well, there must be some way of conceiving why every time we flip the coin, it comes up brokenness. Not random, not good on some issues, bad on others, but pretty damn close to bad on everything. There must be something that's coherent that leads to that consistency. Okay, well, what is it? So I spent years writing things about. I had my own blog called nonesoblind.org, which you can find on as a portal on my current one. It's been archived by people who preserve things. And anyway, I'm very glad that they did, because I put out millions of words analyzing where the country was heading. This had come about, and I saw that there were ways in which things flowed into things, that there were currents in the society that formed alliances and that broken currents of brokenness tended to form alliances with other currents of brokenness, like corporate greed and white supremacy, joined forces and I think took over the Republican Party to a very great extent. Those two forces used to be on different sides of the partisan divide in America. That's part of how I explain why is it the Republican Party got taken over by brokenness. They don't cancel the slave power, the Jim Crow South, the segregation South, the supposedly separate but equal South, the solid democratic South moved over to the Republican Party where, it found waiting for us, for it, the force of corporate greed. And I continued to look into, well, how does all this thing work? And I saw that, how does it that corporate greed gets to be so powerful? And I saw some of the dynamics in the economic system where a lack of wholeness created a possibility for something to get powerful in a society so that it would lead to suboptimal results, like the failure to confront climate change, but a whole ton of others if you have inequalities of power. And you have a system that creates inequalities of power and that's selecting for the ways of wealth, can have brokenness begetting brokenness, and the impact of that on how the human world evolves. And people are suffering from a lot of stuff. People are suffering from the racism that makes their society one where there are some ugly feelings that are playing a major role in that society. It's not the way you would want a society to be. And neither is one where some people have more money than they know what to do with, and other people are starving. There are better ways of becoming, and there are other things in the human world that are working to make them better. But somehow in America, they were getting divided so that one side was really good at power. That's the Republican side. They know how to fight and win. But they were morally completely bankrupt as time went on, and the morality of a decent man who wrote great thank you notes like the first Bush president gave way to, ultimately to Donald Trump. And the other side is for the good things because, if you're going to fight against the people who are for destructive things, it really forces you into the position of being for constructive things. Well, we're clueless about how to fight. And I continued to look into how is it that this kind of coherent force, how does it arise? I mean, I could see that it was acting like evil as it ordinarily conceived, but no, how does it arise? And over the years, I discovered that I can show that given the problem that book shows about the beginnings of what a civilization creating creature unleashes, the ramifications, the implications of me leaving that natural order is to fall into a disorder that generates a coherent destructive force that you can see working through history. And I claim to prove, and I'm not going to try to prove it here, but I claim to prove a couple things. That it was inevitable that civilization would develop in certain pretty ugly ways, not as a function of the nature of the species, but because it was selected for out of a dynamic that they plunged into, that they almost like falling off a cliff. They left an order in which they had evolved biologically and created a whole new situation. And then I can show, I think, that when you want to understand, how is it that something like a war between democracy and fascism can become at the center of the moment in world history? Like we're at such a moment now, not the first time. It's to be understood in those terms. And if you'd like to see how that works, go to my YouTube library and look at a bunch of videos. Go to, the best place to see it laid out so that you'll see, I say it's, I mean, I'm 100% convinced that there's something pretty valid that's pretty important that's there, and on abetterhumanstory.org. And if you want to support my effort, like, follow, and all the rest. I appreciate anybody who's been hanging around for this, and I'll be back next Monday.